Today, Mark and I are going to have a conversation. It's the last weekend of the month, and so we won't have the full discussion tomorrow. And Mark and I and Gabe had a walk around the marina this morning. We do that on Saturdays early and talk about the mental obsession. I thought it may be a good follow-up to talk to Mark, who is a new friend that I met back in August at a men's retreat in Ojai. And we've gotten more and more familiar with each other, and I appreciate his insights and what is going on for him. So I want to share that, and I want people to hear that. And that's, our purpose here is to not only take advantage of each other in terms of our thinking and our potential to interact and interface on exchange in our thoughts and our ideas and concepts, but also share it with people who are out there and maybe struggling with things similar to what we've struggled with. They don't have to be identical to be the same, in the sense that they're generated from the mentality of thinking about thinking as the sole source of our existence. And when we do that, it tends to cause a little havoc, and it would not cause that havoc if it were in fact true. It would cause abundance and be fulfilling and satisfying, rather than debilitating and unsatisfying and discomforting and disturbing and annoying and irritating and restless and discontent. All the things that we're told in the big book occur to people who are in that state of mind. So,
appreciate the opportunity.
What's that?
I said, I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, well, I do too. And I really appreciate you agreeing at the last minute. And I like taking advantage of the moment and talking about this. It's very fulfilling to be what we did this morning, to be in the face of the conversation and outdoors. And while we've done this on Zoom now for a few years, and I've done it with people on a personal level for many years, most of it by telephone. So that personal contact and being able to walk is a very nice addition. I don't know that it makes the difference, but it certainly makes a difference. And having that fresh air and the seagulls and pitter patter of people's puppies running by and human pitter patter and all that kind of stuff is interesting. So it's nice to be in public talking about it and in the open air. So we're doing that to the public, whoever's interested in listening, and we're welcome you and welcome your reactions and your responses. And notice that there is a distinction. Our relationship with you is your response to what we're doing here. And we know you're out there listening. We don't have to know where you are and when you're doing that to know that you are listening. If you're in fact listening, you're listening now to me telling you that we know you're listening. So I don't have to be a brain surgeon to come to that conclusion. And so we welcome you on that basis and appreciate your participation and consideration of what we're talking about, because it can seem heady. And yet I would think if what we're talking about is in fact accurate enough to be simple, it may be the complicated thinking you're starting to witness, rather than think of you as that thinking, starting to notice that your ability to see it is in fact an indication that you can't be the thinking, you're the observer of that thinking. Sort of speaks to what we talked about this morning too, Mark.
I agree. And sort of on that note, a little bit of my response to Gabe, or Gabe's text, having that walk this morning was therapeutic in itself, as to feel a part of instead of apart from.
Yeah. Well, here's the beauty. You can't be apart from something you're a part of. So again, it shows how we can think and how insanity can prevail in our thinking to imagine that it's even possible to be apart from. But I would suggest what we're witnessing is a thought that has no part of reality, because it's baseless, senseless, and has no substance. Like we talked about, it has no denominator, and we keep adding to the numerator, thinking the fraction will at some point become whole, become one, become something. When in fact, all we're doing is spending a lot of time adding to zero. And we're not adding anything multiplied by zero, it always ends up zero. And anything added to zero ends up just being what it was to begin with. You don't need to add it. And if nothing is added to nothing, you got nothing. And that's you were talking about discontent earlier. And if there's no content in the thinking, there's a natural sense of discontent. We feel uneasy about that. Why? It's not the thought that has no content that we're uneasy about. It's thinking about it as though it's real that we have a problem with. So it's really thinking about thinking that causes the problem when we use thinking to think we can turn our thoughts into reality, or that they become reality, and we thus then become only what we think.
So it's my thoughts that are discontent, not my reality.
Exactly. And observing that, to think of thoughts as all we are is to think there's nothing but thoughts, meaning we've got to think obsessively to maintain who we are, or our life is at risk. As we end up thinking our thoughts are our life, and thoughts are life and God and the supreme ruler of the universe and whatever the law and order of nature is, however you want to define it. Because we're literally imagining that we're creating truth, we're creating reality, rather than we're manifesting effects with thoughts. And if the effect is disturbing, there's a good chance it's the disturbing thought we're having that's creating the effect, because that would line up, be a mirror image, a reflection. Feelings feel what we're thinking. They're effects of thoughts, which are the cause.
Okay. Sure, if there was a question there.
No. No, just commentary.
Yeah.
Starting to see that, though, that I noticed you doing earlier, even when you said, it seems like I'm discontent, is really an admission that it seems like it, but may not be. The observing of the thoughts begins to see how flexible the thoughts are, because when you observe them from a different vantage point, if you choose to see them as the observer rather than think you are thoughts, and then in thoughts, and you can't get out of thoughts because they keep happening to you, because it's like an eyeball trying to see itself. Can't happen. And when it does see itself, it doesn't see itself. It sees an image of itself, which happens to be backward, not ironically, just like a lie attempts to be true, tries to be the only thing it can't be. And so it takes all effort in the world to go nowhere.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I was talking about seeming is that I know I'm okay.
Yes.
And I know I'm gonna be okay. But I don't feel like I'm okay. Or I'm not telling myself I'm okay. Or I don't feel okay.
Well, you're thinking of thoughts that aren't okay.
Yeah.
And why would they not be okay? Because you're thinking of them as reality and truth when in fact they're not. So what's interesting, like we started the walk today, if we're thinking about thinking in general to include everything that we're thinking about, rather than some of the things we're thinking in opposition to other things we're thinking, and thinking we need to get each one of those thoughts right, rather than just look at how we're thinking as meaning all thoughts, all thinking, then it becomes a little easier to see that, oh, if I have a mistake in my thinking about the thinking I'm doing, then it's how I'm thinking that's causing the disruption with all of those thoughts. It isn't the thoughts that are the problem, it's my thinking, it's how I'm thinking about those thoughts that's the problem. So I think of something that's wrong. What would be wrong? It wouldn't be right, right? What would be right? Something true, something real, something functional, something real enough to be thought of. And now I'm thinking about something. Let's just say it's something happening in my environment.
Okay.
I'm thinking about a person, right? Which is really a persona. So I'm thinking about their characteristics and their observatory, superficial appearance. And if I have a thought about them that I think is true, I'm going to think they become that thought, not realizing that it's what I'm doing with my thought that's giving me the impression that they become what I think they are. Just like if I start thinking of nature as a problem, I start seeing problems in nature. It isn't nature that's the problem. It's my thinking of it that I'm seeing. So seeing is our form of understanding. Understanding is another way of seeing. So if I'm using only what's visible, what appears, I'm not looking at the substance, I'm not seeing the depth. And depth perception with our visual that's why we have two eyes, to give us a sense of depth to what we're seeing, so we can see the articulation of three-dimensional space. If we have one eye, we don't have that depth perception. Some people have one eye. So in our thinking, if my cause and effect are together, that's what gives me an awareness of what I'm doing that's complete. And to think that all I need to do is feel better all the time is to think that I'm going to treat the effect while completely avoiding the cause. So I'm constantly working on the effect, working on the effect, working on the effect, trying to feel better, trying to get over it, rather than say, there must be a basis in my thinking that's wrong for me to be feeling wrong all the time, or for me to be feeling that something's wrong that I need to get right. And rather than think of the cause, I'm thinking of the effect I need to fix, rather than say it's the wrong thought that's causing the effect to begin with.
Which maybe boils down to action or non-act, yeah, I guess changing, or it would require action.
Well, one of the problems with thinking is that we don't notice that it's an action. Because we're so focused on the effect, we're only thinking about the physicality of the consequence in relation to circumstance very often and situations, rather than seeing that it's how we're seeing the circumstances and situations that's probably, I know that I can make every problem I have worse just by thinking about them more incorrectly than I already am to think of them as problems, rather than challenges or opportunities or something that has a possibility in it that I'm simply not realizing, or learning from it rather than feeling condemned by it. So if I'm thinking only about one half of the equation, which is the effect, I'm naturally going to constantly be maintaining the problem while I'm trying to make believe I'm fixing it. That's addiction. More and more and more is never enough. Why? Because I'm not treating the symptom. I'm treating the symptom. I'm not treating the cause. I'm not looking at what I am doing to create it. And it isn't the what I'm thinking about that's the problem. It's the how I'm thinking about it that's the problem. If I think of something that's wrong and think because I've come to the conclusion that my thinking is true and real, I'm going to think the wrong thing is right and wonder why it doesn't work and think it's got a problem and life is a problem and the world is complicated and people are screwed up, rather than see it's my thinking that's causing the impression.
What do we do once we know that our thinking is the issue?
Well, what you did this morning by saying I seem to be discontent, is you start noticing your words are actually more accurate than you may have been giving them credit for. And I'd mentioned that to you, that we see things in a twisted way to support the twisted thinking we're doing. We think disturbance means get away from it. I don't want to feel disturbed. I don't like this feeling, so I don't want to have this feeling, rather than see that we like it enough to be having it. Why would we have it if we didn't like it? And yet, trying to stop it means, again, treating the effect rather than looking at the cause and saying, oh, if I'm observing what's happening accurately, and I know that I don't like what I'm feeling, maybe the thought I'm having is unlikable because it has no place in reality.
I don't like what I'm thinking.
Exactly. And it's really the how you're thinking too, not just the what. The what becomes the problem, imagined problem, because it's how we're thinking about it as real, like we talked about today.
The how is become where the how has become all the thoughts are about Mark. They're not about others anymore.
Well, you think your thoughts are who you are to think Mark is your thoughts. We think we're thinking about ourself when it's thought thinking of it. We're thinking about thought itself. and think that becomes ourself and myself and yourself. That isn't true.
Or I should say self-absorbed thoughts.
Yes, but think of thoughts thinking of thoughts. They're absorbed in thinking about thoughts themselves, not ourself, not yourself, not myself, but themselves. So we can think about thinking and become embroiled in that thought process, but the only reason we become embroiled is because it's stagnant. And it's a circulation of there's nothing fresh in it at all. There's no new air, there's no new water, so it's going to get poisoned. What happens? We think everyone else is toxic because we have a toxic relationship with the thing we call self. And what is that? A stale mate, literally. I'm creating the problem and trying to fix the problem I'm creating by denying the problem I'm creating. What am I? Wrestling with myself. Myself is an equal opportunity wrestler. It has every opportunity that I have, and every time I try to make it bigger, it gets bigger. And every time I try to make it smaller, it gets smaller. And every time I think I'm making it smaller, it seems to get bigger. And every time I think it will do exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to do to bring balance to what I'm trying to do, so I can think it's sane to continue doing what I'm doing.
Yes.
And it would be a little unstable to do that. So
yes, my thinking has definitely been unbalanced.
Yeah.
Compared to having times in my life where my thoughts were very balanced.
Circumstance can do that at times, because circumstance and consequence are the manifestation of thoughts. That's what we create. What we create are effects, and consequences are the effects of the thoughts we're manifesting. So we don't create reality, we manifest effects. And when the situations are good, we think we're at ease, we're comfortable. And it's easy to feel that because it doesn't feel as disturbing. But if the problem remains the same, it's going to be on the hunt for a new problem to offer.
The problem is Mark.
Well, it isn't Mark, it's who you think is Mark. Mark's just a name. You've never been Mark except by name from a parent, right? So who you are has an essence that doesn't necessarily have a name or need a name. Like God is just a word we use to suggest this infinite, unlimited, loving authority, power. And authority that's loving isn't demanding. It can't be contemptful. There's no condemnation in it because it's about freedom.
The demands that I put on myself.
What's that?
I'm just thinking about the demands that I put on myself.
Yes. Well, think about you being the master of the slave that you're creating by making believe thinking of itself becomes who you are.
It's insane.
Yes. It's insane. Very good. Now, you said earlier, which I thought was quite brilliant, or Gabe said, I don't remember which, but said we don't have to go far to be insane. And it isn't that we become insane or we need to be driven insane. It's that whenever we're thinking thoughts that are untrue, and my suspicion is it isn't an untrue thought is easy to have. But think of all the things happening right now that are untrue that we're not thinking about. We're not struggling with any of them, right? So it's the thought about the thought that's really begins the struggle. Because once I start thinking about it, I think there's something to think about. That's the beginning of my imagination that it's true. And as soon as the conflict comes from thinking there's something to think about, I begin to experience something in my system, inner conflict, emotional turmoil, struggle, anxiety, stress. And it gives me the impression there must be something real there. Because now I'm feeling it. And I think my pain and my struggle is reality, when in fact I've manifested this experience, which is telling me the further I go that something's wrong with what I'm thinking. But being in full flight from reality, as the book talks about, what am I doing? I'm going to deny it's the cause. And I'm going to look to the effect as being the cause. So now I'm ignoring the cause by claiming the effect is the cause, and all I need to do is feel better and get away from it. So what am I? I'm on the run, in denial, in full flight from reality, meaning delusional. Illusions have become reality. Imagery of thoughts, narratives have become reality. And I think it's me because as soon as I conclude I'm the creator of reality, I think I must have created my own self. And in fact, by thinking my thinking is true, I have created a self that I think is who I am, but it doesn't mean thinking who I am. Thinking as who I am is in fact who I am. It just means I'm thinking I am my thoughts. Now, if that's true, there would be nothing I'd have to think about it. And it would always be true whenever I chose to pick up that thought or act on it, always. I'd never have to think about it again. But given it's only based on thinking, I need to think obsessively of it to maintain it, or I think my life is at risk, which is why we talked about this earlier, why I get conflicted by other people's thinking. I all of a sudden think people are enemies if they don't think like I do. And I need to be angry and hostile with them. And you were talking about this as we left. How do I deal with other people who I find I don't like or I'm not tolerant of?
Yeah.
So all of those issues start with a thought.
I find myself much less tolerant with people when I'm much less tolerant with myself.
Yes. Well, think about trying to tolerate a self that has no basis other than your constant thinking about it. It's intolerant by nature because it's defiance, defense, denial, and delusion all wrapped up in an image of an illusion being reality. Think of trying to be tolerant of that. It's intolerable while you're trying to be tolerant. It's the same as the master creating the slave and then feeling like a slave to a master that keeps beating it into this vicious cycle of thinking about thinking about thinking.
All right. So I have to have some type of will in my life, or I'm just going to just sit here. I'm just going to be a bump on a log without any will.
But isn't it interesting? I mean, just consider this. Most of us, if not all of us, have been thinking obsessively so long, when the suggestion is made that we can be free of obsession, we think we're not going to ever do anything again. And we think it's about never thinking again. And we think it's about never accomplishing anything and never having goals and never meeting a challenge. And that's not at all what it is. It's starting to actually take on challenges that are possible rather than impossible. Take on things that are functional rather than
just any expectations about them.
Well, we talked about that earlier too. Expectation. When I think my thoughts are real, I think the only thing I should get from the choices I make is what I thought I'd get when I made that choice. So what do I become? Demanding of, like you just described it, myself to get that thing I want at all costs, because now my life depends on getting that thing because I thought it should be the only thing I think.
Right.
Everyone else has to cooperate.
More demanding or more gracious, depending on what, you know.
But you can see the cycle.
Yeah.
It gets set off and then it gets ridden. And then we think it's riding us, driving us, trading the role between being the master and the slave constantly. Thinking self-abuse is the answer. And what's abusive? Abnormal use.
So looking at it, would you say that this is a third step issue?
I would say it's, if the basis of all the steps, as Bob stated, was love, that they all add up to love, it's a lack of making believe. It's an idea that we're going to love ourselves into reality and into happiness and into love, rather than notice that the nature of existence is the basis of love. It's already our natural state. It's our absolute natural state, not a discussable, negotiable, optional state. But we can think it's optional, and we can think it's discussable, and we can think it's negotiable. But when we think things that are already true need my thinking to make them true, I'm again thinking it's up to my thinking to conclude the truth rather than begin to concede. My thinking has nothing to do with it at all. My thinking is a byproduct of it. My thinking is a function of it. My thinking is a product of it.
Oh, okay. A light bulb just sort of went on and brought me back to a balanced thinking or part of my life where again, my reality is absolute from my thoughts.
Yes. Your thoughts are actually, your choices are always will. Your choices are will. That's your seeming self-will, right? It's the ability you have to make choices. Choices, responsibility, and freedom are all part of the functional capacity of a brain. We've been given bodies, and if you think of it like the cockpit in an airplane, if we're not well versed in the utilization of that cockpit and all the buttons and switches and levers, it's a good chance that plane's either not going to get off the ground, or it's going to crash before leaving the ground, or it's going to crash after leaving the ground. And that basically describes a lot of lives that are lived, a lot of life experiences that are lived. People get it all, and then they have these severe crashes, and it all falls apart. Or they keep getting it and losing it, getting it and losing it, getting it and losing it, sort of almost begging themselves to look honestly at what's happening so they can begin to see the abundance of their nature rather than think of it as an abundance of things and people and places that they need. They need to travel more. They need to have more. They need to have a better relationship. They need to trade in one wife for the next wife, one girlfriend for the next girlfriend, constantly churning and digesting, but never being satisfied. Now, I'm not suggesting you can't have all those things, because you certainly can, but you can have them with freedom and grace and beauty and harmony rather than discord and disharmony and all that stuff that adds up to a very disturbed experience. And it isn't life that becomes disturbed, it's our experience of it. Our life form becomes disturbed. And our bodies are life forms. They aren't life, they're products of life. So when you think of your choice as your will, you always want something from what you think. Always. Every conclusion and choice you make comes with an attachment. If I think my choices are reality, because I think my thinking is real, I think the only option is what I expect when I make that decision. So I'm fighting constantly against my thinking rather than gracefully interacting with things the way they go. And notice, if I'm swimming upstream, it's probably going to exhaust me and drown me, rather than just flowing with the current of the current moment, where I am, as things are, rather than as I think they should be, could have been, wish they were, want them to, all that other stuff that puts me in collision with what's actually happening. One thing you can be assured of is that what's happening is always happening. So if you start remembering that and realize that every possibility that's possible is always possible, that means you always have choice to do whatever you want. But if what you choose is impossible, because your thinking thoughts are reality, you're going to live an existence that has life appear to be impossible, and the world appear to be impossible, and its people appear to be impossible, and life seems complicated and impossible. It is not true at all. Life is very simple. It's been doing what it's been doing for billions of years, and we have struggled a very short time to even imagine it could possibly be only what we're doing and how we're seeing it that's happening. It's simply not true. We've suffered as a species from a lack of conformity, meaning our form has been disformed, deformed, needing reform, and our performance has been perverse, to say the least, in many instances. We're constantly trying to fix things, and we create problems that are 30 years down the road that are not solutions.
So it's all based out of fear. So does my fear create my collision?
Well, the fear is your greater sense of knowing that what you're doing is wrong and actually undermining your capacity to function as a human. That's the fear. Because stress, well recognized, undermines every aspect of our physicality. Our metabolic, parasympathetic, all of our different bodily systems are undermined by stress, which is pressure. What's the pressure? My resistance to reality. It isn't my resistance to reality that's a problem. It's my imagination that it's actually true, that I can resist reality. You can't resist reality. It's already real. It's completely real. It isn't partially real. It isn't sometimes real. It isn't real only because I think it's real. So the fear is an accurate assessment of the fact that we're doing something that is scaring us. It's giving us information, but what do we think we need to do? Get over the fear. Feel better than the fear while we continue to create it. It's an impossibility to continue to do that. You can't keep making the problem and solving the problem at the same time. It just manages this constant grind of background of feeling something's wrong all the time. But the accuracy of that thought, I'm going to suggest, is due credit for being right. We know something's wrong by feeling something's wrong all the time. And what we haven't done is looked at the primary basis of our thinking in relation to reality, rather than think reality's screwed up and the world is difficult and impossible and all those other things we assign to the planetary system. The universe is complicated. Doesn't seem to be very complicated to be doing exactly what it's been doing for billions of years. And it seems to be doing that right now for us to even have this conversation. So I don't know how complicated it is. But when we think about it, we think we need to understand it before it's simple, meaning thought is in control of reality. That's not true. We don't need to understand it. And if our understanding of it is blocking us from it, the relationship we have with it seems to be very perverse, very disintegrative. We're not integrated with it. We're apart from it because we don't understand it and we can't figure it out. Well, it seems to be figured out on its own. It doesn't need us to come to that conclusion. And the further we do, the less of a relationship we have with it that's accurate. So the idea of intuitively being aware of it dissipates in this disharmonious relationship we've created with it. It's disformed.
Right. I'm thinking of what you had commented about people who, have these great highs and then fall, or people who achieve and then fall and achieve and then fall. And I'm always, I guess, in the fear of, I go directly from the fear of not having to, when I have it, the fear of losing.
So what's the book say?
Which reminds me of the song that, freedom is just another word for nothing to lose or something like that. I forget the exact line of it.
Janis Joplin.
Yeah.
Freedom is another word for nothing left to lose.
Yeah.
But think of that. If we've been given everything in an absolute sense, there's nothing to lose whatsoever. And to think of it as not being that, we think we've lost everything and need to make it up. So think of the big book. It says there's two primary fears: not getting what we want and losing what we have. Now think of the current state of thinking in relation to reality. If reality is absolute and true, because truth is in fact reality, then that means there's no variation in it whatsoever. There's no there or then in it. It's always here. It's always now. It's always present for our human experience, always. And it's always in reach. It's not out of reach. It can't be somewhere else. We can't need to go somewhere to get it, or there would be a gap in it, which would violate the whole premise that it's absolute. Okay? So the minute I think it's not here, what have I done? Realized that I think I've lost everything. So what am I afraid of? Not reality, what I'm thinking.
Fearful of my thoughts.
And what's the other one? I'm going to lose everything I have. I just had everything the moment before, and now I've lost it in my thinking. I'm not going to get what I want, meaning I can't possibly achieve the thing I keep denying exists. Because the harder I try to get to it, every time I think I'm seeking it, I'm refusing to admit it can't be lost. So it can never be found. The more I look, the more I claim it isn't here. So what am I getting better at? Denial, delusion, defiance, defense.
Getting better at insane thinking.
Exactly. What I am developing is a case of insanity. And then wondering why I feel afraid.
What just happened? What just went wrong?
Yeah, exactly. In the moment, I create the experience because my thoughts manifest feelings, effects. And what happens? I make sure those effects bear on my body so I can claim it's true and a disease happening to me and I have nothing at all to do with it. If I think I have nothing to do with it, what are the chances I'm going to think there's anything I can do about it? Now think of this sick part. I'm thinking I have nothing to do with it because I am actually the only one having anything to do with it by the thinking I'm doing. And then I go ahead to think, because I think I don't have anything to do with it, that it's impossible I can do anything about it. So I just throw my hands up and say, I have no choice. There's nothing else I can do. I'm just going to continue. It's addiction. Not only in a nutshell, with or without the nutshell. I don't have to be a nutshell to be a nutty professor. So this isn't eventual. It isn't sometime, someplace, there and then. It's now, always. Everything that's ever happening is always happening in the present. So to think we're not in the present is another leap in the direction of insanity. If you ever notice that whenever you think you're not in the present, you're thinking of that thought presently, always. Whenever you think you don't belong where you are, notice where you are is exactly where you are.
Exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Even if you're not supposed to be there, it's where you are. Because again, supposing is a form of posing. It's an imposition on reality. Impositions become depressing the longer they're maintained. And chronic thinking is committed to continuing to maintain the insane thought, thinking someday if I do it long enough, hard enough, it's going to become real. Just like anyone with a compulsion. They think if they do it longer, the gambler thinks eventually they're going to win. They're going to make up all the losses of 20 years of gambling addiction. You actually had some experience with that, if I remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gambling brought me deeper and darker than any drink or drug.
Yeah. Well, consider the gamble we're taking with our life and making believe that our thoughts will come true while denying truth and reality never changes and is always our source. What are the chances? What are the odds? The odds are 0 to trillions. And yet, insanely, we think what I need to do is more of this. What I need to do is continue. What I have failed to do is not enough. And what I need to do is more. That's the problem. So what is the problem? Continuing to think the same thing, harder, more, and wonder why we keep feeling worse and worse and worse and worse.
So it's interesting. For a long time, I would say that I am somewhat grateful for, like, if I didn't rip my life apart gambling, I wouldn't be part of a loving community in Los Angeles. Like I wouldn't.
Give me that again.
Like if I hadn't ripped my life apart gambling,
yes,
I would not be part of a loving community in recovery in Los Angeles. I just wouldn't be. I don't believe I would be there. It's what brought me to Los Angeles. But actually, I think it was, and I haven't beaten myself up in a long time over this stuff, but I think it was even last night. I was in bed thinking about how gambling, the consequences of my gambling and how uncontent I am with it today. That I'm still, again, I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there. It's just what's going on.
Well, as you begin to notice that principles are always principled and they're always present, and there's really only one principle. They're not separate the way we think of them in human terms, but they're honesty and truth and reality and love. And, in the steps, it's about perseverance, meaning continue, rather than redo and repeat ideas that are not true. Begin to reaffirm ideas that are true and operate on a basis that's moral, operate on a basis that has a basis. So in doing that, there's all kinds of words, faith and belief and trust and hope and all kinds of stuff that come into play. But none of those things exist in reality or truth. Reality doesn't have faith in itself because it doesn't have any doubt. It's not in question. It doesn't think. It knows. It knows. It's aware. It's aware. So we know. It can't have something we don't have. We can't be apart from it. So we must know we know and are aware we're aware. Why would we suffer if we didn't?
I like that, what you said about reality doesn't have doubt.
Yeah. It's not in question. And it, by the way, isn't thinking about itself. So where the problem comes for us is not in our nature, that's whole and complete and absolute. It's in our thinking about our nature that is fractured, discontent because there's no content, non-substantive because there's no substance to thoughts that are lies, that aren't true. And a lie doesn't have to be deliberate in our thinking and planned to simply assume something to be true that isn't true, because the effect is exactly the same. It causes a disturbance in our system because our system is based in reality and truth. It notices ripples like a pebble on a lake that's completely still. You throw a pebble in it, it's going to create a ripple that's going to run across the whole lake. Might not be as perceptible as it moves on, but it's still happening to the degree that that water has been touched. And we create those ripples, those wrinkles in time, per se, and feel stuck in them. Feel like we can't get out. And yet, if you change any thought about thinking, you'll notice the thinking about the thought changes immediately, which suggests it's completely flexible. Always changing. And if it's always changing, it's never the same. So the idea that we're stuck in it is impossible. Just another idea that we're repeating the same idea and think we're stuck in it, rather than we've committed to it and are continuing to cause it by restarting it over and over and over again, thinking someday if I keep doing this, it's going to work. It's like restarting a car with no gas and ending up burning out the starter. Then when you get the gas, the car still doesn't start because the battery's dead and the starter's burned out. So noticing things accurately, our body language is actually telling us as we go. If you listen to your thinking and watch your thoughts, you'll notice when you start looking at them and just stop for a minute and listen to what you're saying, that it's actually giving you exact information about what you're thinking, not about reality and truth.
So is there such a thing as an uninsane thought?
I would say intuition is sanity. We're naturally designed to express reality and truth. So it doesn't take thinking about thinking to do that. It takes thinking to follow the leader accurately. And we've been thinking about thinking so long, we keep thinking new forms of thinking about thinking. We're going to fix the thinking about the thinking. So what do? We get self-help. We're trying to help a self that's helping itself to ourself in terms of our experience. It's literally cannibalizing our bodily ability to function healthy in healthy terms because of the dysfunctional activity and anxiety and stress it's creating, undermining all of our bodily systems that work beautifully. And we don't even have to understand them for them to be doing that.
All right. So taking a breath that I don't even think about is not an insane thought. Jumping out of a way of a moving car is a reaction internal, that is not.
Think about that, though, Mark. Think about that. How much thinking goes into the jumping out of the way of the car?
Zero.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
That's something I'm hardwired. So, I'm hardwired to do that. I am hardwired to breathe.
Yes.
I am hardwired for certain things.
Right.
Beyond that, is there something that is a thought or a process that's not insane? Something that I'm not hardwired with, that I don't come with?
Well, I would say inspiration would be the awareness that all possibility is possible, and then the discretion you have is to make any choice you'd like. But when you're choosing from possibility, you're choosing to affirm reality and truth rather than make believe that delusion and denial and defense and defiance is going to eventually win out and prove to be true. So yes, I would say the majority of what can happen is sanity. And we've been sane to the degree that we've noticed something is wrong all along, even when we denied we noticed. We knew something was wrong because we were witnessing the depressing effects on our body, the stress, the broken relationships, the lost cars, the bankruptcies, all those sort of things we've witnessed while we've thought, what I need to do is get more money. What I need to do is correct this. What I need to do is get what they have. What I need to do is think harder, develop more ambition, more self-confidence.
I'm just trying to, again, think of, I drove to meet you and Gabe this morning. I stayed within the lines and I didn't hit anybody so those were all sane thoughts. What, I don't know.
Listen, a wrong thought is sane when it's allowed to be wrong. It's insane when we think it's right because we're asking it to be what it's not. Now think about that. Think about a lie. A lie is only based on thinking that it's true. So the one thing it can never be is the only thing a lie is. A lie is not a lie when it stops thinking it's true. When someone says, oh, that's not true, they're no longer thinking a lie. Or when they say the lie is a lie, it literally becomes true. Think about, remember in algebra, minus times a minus is a plus? So a lie is true. A lie as truth is negative. There are no negative numbers in reality, by the way. They're all conceptual in mathematics. So you can't take something away from nothing, right? And negative numbers came into understanding from, well, subtraction, certainly, but you have to have something to subtract, right? But negative numbers are subtracting from zero. So they only exist as a concept in mathematics to make mathematics work, which shows that there's some sub-essence that is unseen by us. So it doesn't have to be like substance. Think of the words substance and understand. They're beneath our feet. They're the ground we walk on. Where's the stability? On the planet, the gravity, all the natural things that basically hold us to this, or we'd be floating, going nowhere. We'd have nowhere to go, feeling like it. Feeling like we had nowhere to go would be normal because we'd just be floating around somewhere. We wouldn't even know where. The wind would blow us. But yet we have this gravitational thing and think we don't control where we're going. Think we can be out of control. And like we talked about earlier, out of control when it comes to insanity is noticing there's no control in it whatsoever because there's nothing to control. So my experience in what you're asking about, is there a sane thought? First of all, I would say with human experience, reality is sanity. Because reality certainly wouldn't be insane, nor would truth be insane. But thinking our thoughts are real and true becomes insane.
That matters.
Because now we're starting to create this sort of self-serving thought, which we call it, when it's really just thought thinking of itself that we're doing. And for the thought to think the conclusion it's creating is right, within the thinking, it is right. If 2 + 1 is right for the thought, that's right for the thought. It's never going to match up in reality. It's never going to be functional. It's always going to create disturbances. But unto the thinking, it's perfectly fine to be able to come up with that. We're free to come up with that conclusion. It just doesn't have any place. It doesn't fit because it doesn't belong. It doesn't have any place in reality. There's no place to express it. When you begin expressing reality, you'll see it'll work. And even when it doesn't work quite right, you're going to be happy for the experience because you're refining your thinking about reality and about nature and about how things work and function. That's how results are produced and goals are achieved. But the difference is, it won't be for you alone. You'll start seeing that everything you're doing is affecting everyone, and everything you've been misdoing and mistaking has also been affecting everyone the whole time. Everyone, everywhere, and everything everywhere. Not just you and I because we're close to one another, or those people in your family that witnessed it. Everybody, everywhere, all the time. Now, when you start operating effectively and efficiently, you realize, oh, I'm being beneficial for everything and everyone, everywhere, all the time. And I become an example of reality's expression. And helpful because people don't need to look too far. Kids learn to ride bikes when they see their friends start riding bikes. When a parent tells them how to ride a bike, They don't learn. They don't catch on as quickly. But they see their friends do it and they're like, oh, I can do that. They can do that. I want to do that. Boom. When you witness people, they don't have to tell you what they're doing to be interested in what they're doing, because we're all interested in surviving and thriving, not just existing, not just barely getting by, but thriving so that we have enough to give everyone, because our nature is that we're already giving everything to everyone and we've just had very little to give. And much more than that, not much of what people want, because it's so sick. We've been cultivating sickness and then thinking we're better because other people are as sick as we are, or we feel better than them because they're sicker than we are. Think of how sick that is, to feel that my basis in life is better because I'm not as bad as someone else. That's a pretty depraved view of life.
Interesting. I again, been part of this community for 10 years. And I say that, people, when I got here, they didn't tell me what to do, but they left really, really deep footprints for me to follow.
Yeah.
And I put that analogy now to what you were just describing about kids watching other kids learn to ride a bike, and that's how they really learn. Like it's quite amazing.
One of the few things ever published by the American Medical Association in their journal, which is sort of revered for being the highest science, was done by a woman that was not schooled in psychology or medicine or anything, but noticed that the peer relationship was more impactful. She may have been a teacher, I forget, but they published, one of the first times they ever published something from a non-academic, non-doctor, non-licensed professional.
And when was this published?
In the last 10 or 15 years, I believe.
Okay.
But it was notable on two counts. Notable that she came to terms with it well enough to describe and develop, and notable that the academic community opened up and said, you know what? She got this right. And we're gonna help her promote that because it works. And it shows that as dysfunctional as things can be, and I'm not aiming at psychiatry or psychology or medicine or any of that, but humans are prone to undermine their own capacity to be functional by making believe they have no interest in anything beyond the limits of their thoughts, which tend to regurgitate thoughts over and over again, where they're not nourishing, they're not food for thought anymore. There's no nourishment in them because they just become these sort of defensive tendencies that are very stagnant and turn to poison like water does when it isn't refreshed. So that toxicity they seem to have overcome in this case, and I give them great credit, because I think it's profound, literally finding that there is more going on than we generally think is going on. And to think that our thoughts are conclusive is to hold ourselves in check against all other information that we may be perceiving. And Herbert Spencer's quote about contempt prior to investigation is the bar to all knowledge. Basically, the resistance to grow, it's in the big book. I don't have it memorized, but it's a very good example. He being a studier of history and philosophy and wrote one of the greatest histories of modern both philosophy and life, saw that historically. Self-righteous indignation has been used through history to justify oppressing, suppressing, and killing other people because they don't think like we do, and think that somehow that gives us prominence and gives what we think is power. It doesn't give us power. It empowers other people to react and fight back, and it's just a matter of time. And that's pretty well how human history has been written. For as long as we've been here, we have been fighting back and forth, thinking the war is going to be won and somebody's going to finally resolve it, while it just continues. If we're doing that individually in our own experience with reality, we are partaking and participating in that eventuality that we're witnessing today. We are creators of it, perpetuators of it, to the degree that we continue to think of it in terms that are unlike or unlikely to be real or true.
All good stuff.
So,
it yeah, it's it's okay to be not okay.
well, and
And
now
that's
let me reframe that. It's just okay to not think you're okay
right.
and begin to see that it's perfectly okay to have wrong thoughts. And it's actually perfectly okay to think they're right. But when we go into a delusional, hypnotic hallucination that all they are is right, now we've crossed over that point from
To the
sanity
insanity.
to insanity
Right.
and made believe that what we think of, we're hearing voices in our head, literally, we're talking to our thoughts, thinking we're talking to ourselves. Think about that. We're talking to ourselves, which means there's two of us at least in our brain. And I would suggest every one of those thoughts we think are real all have a voice. So when people say, I've got voices in my head and the committee won't shut up, they're talking about all the voices they're hearing from the thoughts they're having, because they're talking to them as though they're reality rather than saying, I'm talking to my thinking. We say, I'm talking to myself. I'm thinking about myself. It isn't ourself. It's our thinking. We're thinking about itself that we're thinking of. So reframing from being, I'm always okay. How can I not be okay if I got everything? If I'm already rooted in an essence that is absolute knowing, an absolute being, an absolute presence, an absolute rightness, because it'll always work if I rely on it, always. Even if I dysfunction, I'm going to notice it immediately and correct it rather than try it for 30 years and think someday I might get better and finally realize I've wasted a lifetime of opportunity by making believe somehow more and more and more of the wrong thing will eventually be right. The immediacy of our capacity is the gracefulness and elegance of life's prominence in our experience. And the gratefulness is noticing this fullness of greatness that we have. So when I say I am not okay, I'm thinking I'm my thoughts again, rather than my thoughts don't have to be okay for me to be okay. Because my thoughts, I'm choosing the content of them. I'm not choosing to think necessarily because my thinking just thinks. My brain thinks, that's what it's designed to do. But yet I'm the chooser of the content. So when I'm choosing content that has no substance, I feel discontent, like you had described earlier.
Right.
I'm just witnessing the lack of substance. So what do I feel when I have no substance? I have no place to stand. What do I feel? I don't belong where I am. What do I think? I need to get somewhere with someone and have more or less of something else. Not what I have, because what I'm having, I think, is true and real, which is simply having a thought that I think about then, because this thought here now is being thought of by a new thought now as being real enough to be thought of.
I think maybe one of the most sane things I said today was when I got in the car after our walk, I was returning a text and somebody says, "How are you doing?" I just said, "Better than I think I am."
Very good. Well,
That was probably my one sane thought of the day.
but now think of that intuition, Mark. Think of the clarity of beginning to see so quickly as a result of a walk, something you might not normally say, but how quickly it came and was clear enough for you to feel affirmed by it. And the big book says it doesn't say take action. We mistake this. Everybody says action is the answer. Action's the solution. Well, it doesn't say lie, doesn't say kill people, doesn't say hate people, doesn't say be contemptful and spiteful and self-centered and drink. Drinking's an action. Drug use is an action. Gambling is an action.
No, it says help.
Violence is an
It
action.
says to help others.
Well, it says affirmative actions. What is affirmative? We're affirming principles. We're affirming reality. We're acting in relation to reality and truth rather than as reality and truth. We're starting to see, oh, if my nature is reality and truth, that should be easy to express when I stop thinking. My thinking is my reality and my truth.
Actions. I'm writing that down.
So you're a quick study And you also had a lot of experience, like I did, of failing and making believe that failure was going to somehow be right. And the fact was, the failure was actually grooming me to finally come to terms with the fact that it had never been right. And I'd been delusional for years, decades, not just recently. Witnessing that history that I think of is witnessing the memories I have about those things and seeing accurately that I have been wearing a weight as a result of those things because I thought of them as true and real. I thought of them as something I had to go back in time to fix rather than start to notice that the present issue is what I'm thinking about them now. And the healing is in the present. The forgiveness is in the present. The having is in the present. And if I don't think I have something, what are the chances I'm going to let go of it? I got nothing to let go of. So to think I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing and think I'm going to get over it by resisting doing it rather than say, how could I be doing it and think I shouldn't be doing it? That's a major conflict. If I'm doing it, I am doing it. If it is sick, it is a sick thought that I am doing. What is doing? My thinking. It's an action. It's a
just
primary
a thought,
action.
not reality.
Exactly. It's just a thought. So an illusion's not a problem. And to think of it as real isn't a problem. That's what screenwriters do. That's what great literary figures do. That's what poets do. They attempt to reveal this by speaking of it in ways that are artful enough to pull us out of this rational construct into a more abstract awareness where we know that we know something greater than the thinking that we're doing. And when all we think is thinking is all we know more than that for sure. And to begin to remind our seeming selves or our experience or our thoughts, I would say better, of that fact is to put thoughts in their place by seeing that they are subsequent to reality and truth, not the purveyors and the creators and the makers of reality and truth. And all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what other people think so much because I'm not fighting for them to think like I do. And I can say, wow, that's an interesting thought. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's interesting. I've never thought of that. Thank you. You offer me some perspective. Now you see the concert that we're all in, the symphonic concert. And we're acting concertedly together, starting to see that the capacity we have to do great things is also the capacity we have to be doing everything right now as it is. And we must want it to be having it as it is right now, as sick as that seems to consider or seems to be to consider. That we could possibly want all the things going wrong in the world right now. But it seems like, as you described earlier, we seem to need pain to get our attention off of continuing to create more pain to distract us from the consequence of the creation that we're causing. Manifesting, I would say. Not quite. I guess we're causing an effect, but it's really manifesting an effect rather than creating reality of an effect. The effect is just a natural byproduct. If it's disturbing and uncomfortable, the thought is disturbing and uncomfortable because it has no place in reality. None. So getting clear at the most fundamental aspect of living allows thinking, like you just witnessed, to come, the answers become honest rather than fine, thanks, how are you doing? Oh, great. Yeah, nice to hear from you. Nice to see you. Nice to bullshit. It's all cordiality and manners, politeness. It's basically an artificial intelligence. It's just promoting ideas that aren't true, sort of in this trying to be better than we are. Why would we have to think we have to be better than we are if we were better? We wouldn't. We'd just be expressing better things that everybody would appreciate because we wouldn't be helping them depreciate their experience. So the beauty of healing is when you see it accurately, it takes no time whatsoever to heal years worth of regret and all those other things that we thought we were actually maintaining to prove we were interested in fixing it, which was trying to prove that we were correct in continuing to maintain it. It's the insanity of it becomes clear. You will cry with laughter rather than dramatic effect or for dramatic effect, which you were talking a little about earlier, the drama.
Yeah, just it's okay to be, again, uncomfortable, or not to have a good thought or sane thought, and it's
Right.
just it's
Exactly. Certainly, if we're
a little
doing
bit
it,
of peace in that.
it must be okay to be happening.
Yeah.
If it's happening, we might just want to concede that if it's happening, rather than get into a debate with what's happening as though it shouldn't be happening and wonder why we think life's gotten complicated. Well, we're complicating the hell out of it by thinking it shouldn't be happening as it's happening. So what kind of responsibility is that but an attempt to be irresponsible and think that we're victims of what's happening? Now I have no power at all. And when all along I've had all power. It hasn't been my power, it's been our power. It's been the nature of power. It's been the nature of essence, the
Like
nature of
what you were talking about earlier. It's, turning everything on its head, to surrender to win
yeah,
and give it away to
paradox.
get it. And, you
Yeah.
know, everything that,
There are no paradoxes in reality and truth because the opposite of reality is reality. And the opposite of truth is true in an absolute state. In this seemingly bisected world of relative relationships, opposites seem to be possible when in fact they're connected by common ground. Good wouldn't be good if it wasn't based in bad. So they're the same thing, just being seen from different points of view. And those points of view we're free to take. But to mistake the point we've taken as the only point to take is to think that every other point has to be fought and overcome and denied, rather than see why would we have the freedom to take a position and nobody else have that freedom. And to start seeing it that way, you say, oh, well, yeah, it's just a position somebody's taken, which becomes an imposition if I think it's reality, and impositions lead to depression if I continue to impose them on my experience. I think they're real, so I start to collapse under the weight of this seeming reality. It's like being in a dream when you're afraid and you're running and running and running and running and you can't get away, and you wake up and say, oh, that was a dream. We have daydreams and think we're awake by thinking we need to continue to dream the thing that's scaring the hell out of us. And what would be wrong with having hell scared out of us, by the way? We talk about it as though that would be a bad thing.
wow.
And what are we doing? Maintaining the state of hell we're creating in this vicious cycle of thinking about thinking as reality and truth.
Having the hell scared out of me is life-saving the majority of the time.
What's that?
Having the hell scared out of me is life-saving.
Exactly. It's like when they say breathtaking. Think about that. Death is breathtaking. But something that's exhilarating is actually breath-giving. We're taking a breath. It's not taking the breath. We're taking a breath.
Yeah.
We're taking inward. And we don't breathe very well. We're the only species that seems to need breath work classes to teach us how to breathe. We don't breathe very well. Our posture is crippling our lungs.
Yes.
We don't stand straight, or our backs are contorted, or all of the physicalities are complicated by our dysfunctional thoughts that give us all kinds of bodily sensations that are reflecting the disease of the unnatural, unhealthy, diseased thinking that we're doing. It's all reflected in that. My experience is that when people are reactive, they're always fighting for their thoughts. So they're never quiet. And if they're quiet, they're only waiting for somebody to stop so they can launch talking, right? You maybe witnessed this.
Yes.
So when I'm obsessively thinking about a thought, I think I need to tell that story till the bitter end. And when someone hears it completely in all of its details, I don't want to be interrupted. I want to let me finish what I'm that all that stuff comes up. Why? Because I think I need to express my truth to gain an ally in the storytelling venture I'm in, making believe that all I am is what I think. And I need to have you understand my story, because once you do, you'll understand me. And then you won't do those things that I think you shouldn't do because they're not aligned with the thinking I think is the only thinking you should be doing.
So you were just saying that people are either wanting to tell their story or waiting to tell their story.
Yeah. Well, if you interrupt somebody, generally they'll pick up where they left off. They don't hear what you're saying. My experience is obsessive thinking only hears what it thinks is being said to support the continuation of the thinking. So it isn't listening to what's being said. Just like obsessive thinking thinks it sees what it sees, when actually what it sees is what it thinks it sees. So it doesn't see at all. So the spiritual awakening is actually awakening to what's actually happening. And self-realization and self-actualization, if you take the self away, is simply actually realizing what's happening. That's it. It's very simple. Why? Because actuality is reality and it's factuality. Why? Because it's happening. And if we can stabilize our thinking by simply conceding that what's happening is happening as it's happening, at a human level, we're starting to orient our thinking with what's happening rather than what we imagine is happening, what we think should be happening, what we wished is happening, what would have been happening, what might have been happening, what could have been happening, and all these other versions we're trying to infect ourselves with that become intoxications with thought. Obsessive thought, meaning a wrong thought trying desperately to be right.
Right. I just put those two and two together, and I just wrote it down.
What was that?
Again, there's nothing wrong with thinking. Thinking is sane.
Yeah.
When I put the obsessive in front of it, that becomes insane.
Well, the only reason for the obsession, and this is what I was pointing out with people who are thinking obsessively, is that they're not hearing what's being said. So if you follow the track of their conversation, you may interject something, but you'll see them pick up exactly where they left off because they've got to complete that cycle. Thinking it's reality, they need to have you understand their reality and their truth, or else they think they're completely ignored and invisible. Why? Because the invisibility of what they're thinking about has no basis. So people think they're hearing, but they're hearing what they're thinking you say, and they're seeing what they think they're seeing, not what's actually being seen, not what's actually being heard. Thinking and hearing, seeing and hearing things that aren't happening is a basic definition of insanity. Obsessive thinking is the sick, addictive thinking that causes all reactive, impulsive, and compulsive behaviors, all forms of addiction that are symptoms, by the way, again, effects of an underlying cause. And I don't think underlying here is an accident, because if you think of underlying, our substance is based on no stance at all if we're lying. And our understanding is misunderstanding when we think what we're thinking is true and real at the expense of thinking we can deny truth and reality. There is no standing in that whatsoever. So why wouldn't we feel out of place? Why wouldn't we feel like we have to get somewhere? Why do we think we have to get somewhere? Because we think we're nowhere. We think we're nothing. We've caused the impact of that by manifesting. The cause of the thought has manifested the effect. So we treat the effects. That's what addiction is. Feel better.
So I would imagine somewhere in there, we're seeking validation.
Constantly. Why? Because the thinking is invalidated. We didn't even park the car and we're trying to get a ticket stamped. We're trying to get a free pass.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. Think about a thought with no substance immediately causes a disturbance in our awareness because there's nothing there. So if we don't think about it again, it just vanishes. There's nothing there. There's nothing to think about. So it's the thinking about it now, thinking that this thought in the past now has a place to exist, by the new thought thinking about it seems to confirm it and validate it, when in fact it keeps creating a sense of emptiness.
It reminds me of a situation that happened to me a little bit ago where somebody was basically, somebody was talking to me about whatever it was, and I needed some time to process. Okay. And I just wasn't taking their suggestions like that. And I was having in conflict with this person,
Yes.
and it was, I realized like what's going on is we're not validating each other. He was making suggestions, and I'm not saying that they were right or wrong. I needed time to process them, and not, and I actually said that to him. I was like, problem is we're not validating each other. And he just went off yelling at me, I don't need your validation. I never said you did. I just said we weren't validating each other.
But you can see the insistence of the resistance is the persistence of the thinking that is very demanding, very insistent, and very persistent, and angry generally. There's no anger in reality and truth. There's no hatred. There's no violence because there's no conflict. There's no winner. It already is everything. What's there to win? If that's our nature, we have nothing to lose, literally. When we begin to accept that we've been given everything, we realize there's nothing to lose because we're not dealing in a dimension of win or lose. We're not dealing in a dimension of have and have not. We're not dealing in a dimension of something that can be and can't be. We're simply in the presence of an absolute state of being, awareness, that is always present. It's just an absolute state of being. And it's an absolute state of awareness, and it's an absolute state of knowing. Now, I can tell you that's there, but my words are useless to your thinking. But the suggestion that considering it, just considering it, if you consider 2 + 2 is 4, you might, as you apply it, find out that it works and use it without having to think much about it at all. But if I tell you 2 + 3 is 4, and you try to use it and it keeps calling conflict, you're not going to think very well of me. Because you're going to know that somehow you assimilated a thought that I gave you and made believe it was true, and now are finding it isn't true at all. And tracking it back to your experience of me would not help our development of a relationship in anything other than the conflict that was created. So you can read the point I was making about witnessing other people is when they're insistent about what they're saying, they're promoting an idea that has no basis. Now, pulling that back to us, we wouldn't notice that in somebody else if we weren't doing it. And we don't have to be doing it immediately and exactly as they're doing it, like we talked about earlier today. We don't have to be doing it exactly to be doing it in some way that bothers us. And we want them to stop because we're persisting and continuing to think of them in ways that aren't true. Because I'm still connected to ideas that aren't quite right. I haven't really come to that intuitive clarity that just helps me understand stuff immediately, and I don't have to think about it at all because I know even if I don't think I know that there's something about it that's right, and certainly much more than that could be wrong in terms of what I'm thinking. And I start to see the distinguishing characteristics of my own capacity to observe my interactions with people. Rather than inner reactions, they're just interactions. They're seamlessly constantly considering and flowing, and the change is being witnessed as something that is new and refreshing rather than stagnant and old or stuck or fixed. Think of fixed, meaning can't be moved. Well, if you're not movable, you're not going to be inspired. You're not going to be moved by something and really able to take that breath
and sit in silence.
Yeah. Well, and part of that point I think I started on, which I'm sure I got waylaid a little bit, but is that the silence in this experience of the discussion becomes obvious when people start contemplating and imagining and realizing that they've been condemning their imagination and contemplation and realizations for being reality and truth rather than considerations that turn into awe and wonder and exploration and an adventure. in their experience, their life form's experience with life. And it becomes pretty awe-inspired to just witness the backdrop of silence and stillness as a meditative awareness. And my suggestion is we're always in a meditative awareness. We're always meditating because we're always aware, absolutely aware that we're aware. And if that weren't the case, when people meditated, they wouldn't feel better. And pretty much everybody I know that meditates always feels better when they meditate. So to think of it as only happening when we take time out, and then when we stop, we don't feel better because now we're starting to interact, tells me that we're cultivating an experience in an environment that's conducive to that, and not cultivating the same experience into environments that are not conducive to it, and learning how to deal with the challenges of people who are insane and reactive and struggling, and become valuable to them because we're willing to stick with them through the thick and thin that they're creating in their own experience, because we know that it's nothing more than a delusion. And if I think it's them that's causing it, I think it's real. Again, I'm thinking insanity's reality for me to want to stay away from them, to avoid their toxicity. It must be my toxicity that I'm taking with me that I'm struggling with. Because nobody can impact me more than that internal conversation, because my brain is as close to me as anybody's ever gotten in terms of who I am as a body, or who I think I am as a body. Nobody gets closer than that to me. So nobody can cause me harm with their thoughts. Nobody. Nothing can do that to me. It's what I think about it that causes the harm. You're an easy mark. And listen, you and I met on a difficult day. I remember how it started. Yes. And I appreciated your willingness, and I saw it. I could feel it coming when you walked into that plaza or the courtyard there.
Yeah.
But I don't think of this as something I do. I think of it as something we are all doing and not always expressing very well, and not always functioning on the basis of very well. And as a result, we offer each other perspective, great perspective, and the benefit of each other when we're seeing it in accurate ways, rather than in irritated, abysmal, contemptful, spiteful, hateful, petty ways, which are all consequences of thinking my thoughts are real. All I am is my thinking. And all of a sudden I become this pitiful representation of my possibility. And I know that I'm less than, so I worry about feeling less than. And I know that I'm inestimable in what I'm doing, so I'm trying to get more self-esteem. And I know that I have no confidence whatsoever, so I need more self-confidence. And I know I have no ambition, because why would I continue to drive myself crazy when I'm already sick and tired of it, but I don't seem to be tired enough to stop. And so I want more self-ambition. I want to be more driven and all that stuff. And I'm literally driving myself crazy when I don't have to be driven anywhere to concede that it's where I am that's happening.
Surrender.
Well, and concession is just starting to say that there is no fight, there is nothing to even surrender to, but to imagine that there's a fight inside of me that I can both create and win simultaneously makes no sense at all when you begin looking at it. It's like claiming you can't climb the wall, so you continue to make it higher, and claiming you want to while you're continuing to I want to get better, but I continue to make it worse. That's the insanity of this internal struggle that we're capable of producing. It's why people say you're your own worst enemy. But it's not me that's the worst enemy. It's my misuse of thinking. It's my choice to act as though I know the control board well enough, and I keep flipping the same old switches and wonder why the plane keeps nosediving. I'm not taking the clues because I'm blind. I go blind to what's happening in the name of thinking that if I can pretend I'm not seeing it, it isn't happening anymore. I'm playing peekaboo as an adult. Tag, you're it. Putting it on you, not me. You're the problem. I need to stay away from you. I don't like toxic people. Well, I wouldn't bother considering that if I weren't toxic in my own thinking. It wouldn't bother me. So I appreciate this.
No, thank you.
You're very welcome.
In a way, with the the remembrance of things in the past that have worked, and also new tools that I've discovered or unearthed with you today.
Yes.
So I appreciate you.
The application of those things, let's say you've always known it. If you haven't known it, if you know, you've always known it and just didn't think you knew it. So you operate on the basis of your thinking your thinking was real. You didn't bother to admit you knew more than your thinking, because that would sort of dispel the rumor and the gossip you were spreading in your own thoughts that you didn't know. Kind of crazy to do that, right? We're going to discount everything in the name of knowing nothing. Only what we think we know. But when you begin realizing the memories are just things in the present, thinking about things not happening, but what's happening is the thought about it in the present, you see the healing of it as seeing, oh, I've been thinking about this thing as though it was in the past. That can't be right, because there is no past for it to be in other than the memory I'm having in the present.
Because all I have is the present.
What's that?
All that there is the present. That is
exactly.
reality.
Exactly. So when I start thinking about that thing as only being in the present, I easily can see that healing's in the present, because I don't have the same insistence that I go back in time, which is impossible, and feel aggravated and irritated by the attempt to do what can't be done. And I start looking at it and saying, wow, that really made an impression on me. I really remember that time, which tells me that I probably have some regret tied to it, that I have some wish tied to it, some hopeful thinking tied to it. That isn't necessarily true, but it's an indication of my own concern for what I've done and how I've acted, which suggests that perhaps I could be better acting now. I could be a better actor and a better expressor.
I could be a better thinker.
Yes. Yes.
Instead of misusing my thinking.
Yes. Well, think of abuse as abnormal use. And what's interesting about that is that the allergy in alcoholism, an allergy is an abnormal reaction. What's abnormal? I want to do more of the same thing to fix the problem. Yeah. But what's interesting is that only seems to happen with allergies that make you feel better by having the effect. If I have a peanut allergy and I start to choke, people who have peanut allergies tend not to get near peanuts. They
certainly don't eat more of them when they're around them.
Exactly. But with alcohol, we like the effect because we feel better for a minute. And with lying, we like the effect because it gives us a momentary sense of control and power, because we're denying it and we think we're winning. And then we start doing it over and over and over again, but it wears thin because it's so thin as to not even exist. And the veil of it starts to become obvious in time. Pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. We start realizing I can't take it anymore. The fact is there's nothing to take because there's nothing to give. You can't carry a message that has nothing to take and nothing to give. What is there to carry? Nothing. You're carrying the disease, literally. And it's contagious, just like the solution and the healing is contagious, and the forgiving. And the difference is acting in accordance with nature immediately confirms and affirms the action. Acting in discordance with nature continually disaffirms and maligns our own experience to thinking misery is a natural aspect of life and thinking is naturally screwed up and there's nothing we can do about it. That's a hopeless, helpless situation. And we're not helpless and we're not hopeless. If we're thinking about things that are hopeful, we need very little hope to help ourselves. But to help ourselves to ideas that are hopeless is continuing to feed and fuel the idea that somehow we're going to get where we already are. And all we need to admit is that we're already there. We're always there. Even when I'm thinking I'm not, I still reaffirm I am. I just don't think I am. So I'm going to live with the not thinking I am while I know I am, and start to distinguish the difference between my thinking and my knowing self, my knowing reality. Yes, exactly. Good. You're a good man. I appreciate this greatly.
Thank you, Jack.
Love you.
Love you. You just stop.
See you on campus.
Yes. Stop the recording for a minute, if you could.
Now we're really going to get into it, right?